He built an empire. She never forgot her promise. When she walked into his boardroom, a billionaire's world was turned upside down by the one woman from his past. Hello, bestie. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. The 68th floor of the Adebayo Tower was more than an office. It was the sanctum of a king. Kola the Titan Adebayo stood before a wall of flawless glass, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the teeming Lagos skyline. At 35, he had carved this kingdom from sheer will, transforming the Adebayo Group from a modest trading company into a sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in cement, sugar, and the soon-to-be-launched crown jewel, the Dangote refinery-scale Adebayo Petrochemical Complex. His personal space was a masterclass in Afro-minimalist luxury. The air was cool and carried the subtle, clean scent of his signature pressed white shirt, a uniform of his power and control. A monolithic desk of solid Irako wood, its surface polished to a mirror shine, stood as his command center. Behind him, a vibrant, textured painting by Victor Ahikamanor exploded with color against a wall of muted gray concrete, a testament to rooting audacious art in solid foundations, a metaphor for his entire life. The soft, warm glow of a suspended bocce light fixture contrasted with the harsh Nigerian sun blazing outside. A discreet chime broke the silence. His secretary's voice, smooth as velvet, filled the room. Mr. Adebayo, the next candidate for the financial analyst position is here. Send them in, he replied, his voice a low baritone that demanded attention without raising its volume. He moved to his throne, a sleek, high-backed chair of Italian leather, and schooled his features into a mask of impassive authority. The interviews had been a necessary tedium. He needed the best, but so far he had found only the competent. The door hissed open. The third candidate entered, and for the first time that day, Kola's focus genuinely sharpened. She was younger than the others, 25 at most, with an aura of quiet self-possession that immediately set her apart. She was dressed not in flamboyant couture, but in a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue dress that spoke of understated confidence. Her hair was drawn back into a severe, sleek ponytail that highlighted the elegant line of her jaw and the calm intensity in her eyes. She carried a slim portfolio, her posture perfectly poised as she greeted him and his HR director with a respectful nod. Mr. Adebayo, this is Amina Suleiman, the HR director announced. The name Amina Suleiman landed not as a sound, but as a physical blow to his solar plexus. It was a key turning a lock he had sealed shut 2 decades ago. The sterile, air-conditioned office dissolved. Abaddon, the sweltering, dust-moated air of his grandfather's compound. The smell of burning firewood and frying plantain. He was 15, home on holiday, already towering over his cousins and filled with the arrogance of a scholarship boy destined for greatness. She was 5, a scrawny, bright-eyed girl with knees scraped from play, who followed him like a devoted shadow. He had been explaining to his friends how he would one day own a building that touched the sky. Little Amina had marched right up to him, her small fists planted on her hips, her voice ringing with absolute, unshakable certainty. Kola, when I grow up, I'm going to be your wife. The laughter from his cousins was immediate and raucous. He, wanting to seem the big man, had looked down at her, a smirk playing on his lips. He remembered the feel of the hot sun on his neck as he scoffed. Wife, little Amina, go and play with your dolls. Wives don't bother with books and business. They stay at home. The memory of her face, the way her bright eyes had welled with tears she refused to shed, the way her bottom lip had trembled just once before she set her jaw in defiance, flashed before him now with punishing clarity. He had turned and walked away, the incident buried under the weight of his own burgeoning ambition. Now here she was, the ghost from Abaddon, no longer a memory but a woman of flesh and blood, standing in the heart of the empire he had built with the very books and business he had once claimed were beyond her. He watched, mesmerized, as she took the seat opposite him, her movements economical and graceful, She met his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw no flicker of recognition, no hint of the past. There was only a calm, intelligent focus. The little girl had been erased, replaced by a formidable professional. And in that moment, Kola Adebayo, the man who commanded billions, felt the first crack appear in his perfectly controlled world. The interview hadn't even begun, and he already knew with a terrifying, thrilling certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The air in the boardroom, usually a sterile and controlled environment, suddenly felt charged, thick with a history only Kola was privy to. He consciously slowed his breathing, forcing the image of the heartbroken little girl from his mind. This was business. This was his empire. He leaned back in his leather chair, the movement deliberate, and steepled his fingers, his expression settling into the unreadable mask he wore for high-stakes negotiations. His eyes, dark and assessing, remained fixed on her. "Miss Suleiman," he began, his voice a carefully modulated baritone that filled the spacious room. "Your CV is impressive. A first class in economics from the London School of Economics, followed by a master's in finance from Stanford. Top of your cohort." He paused, letting the weight of her credentials hang in the air. With such a stellar international profile, one wonders why the return to Nigeria, and more specifically, why my company. Amina met his gaze without flinching. Her hands rested calmly on the table, a single pen lying beside her portfolio. There was no nervous fidgeting, no seeking approval. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and measured, carrying a quiet confidence that belied her age. "Thank you, sir. While the international experience was invaluable, Nigeria is where the real challenges and the most meaningful opportunities lie. The Adebayo Group isn't just a corporation. It's a blueprint for national industrial development. It represents a vision of self-sufficiency that I find compelling." She shifted slightly, her posture straightening even further. "To be more specific, your flagship refinery project is a game-changer. However, its third phase, involving large-scale international procurement, is highly exposed to currency fluctuation risks. A 10% devaluation of the naira could inflate your capital expenditure by hundreds of millions of dollars." Kola felt a jolt of surprise. She had moved from polite generalities to the precise, granular pain point his own team had identified just days ago. "Go on," he said, his interest now genuine and professional. She did. For the next 5 minutes, Amina Suleiman dissected his multi-billion-dollar project with the precision of a surgeon. She spoke of dynamic hedging strategies using a basket of currencies, proposed strategic local content investments to reduce forex exposure, and outlined a socio-economic impact model that would not only benefit local communities but also serve as a powerful PR tool. Her analysis was not just theoretical. It was practical, razor-sharp, and deeply intuitive. The financial director, a stern man in his 50s, was nodding along, a rare sight. This was not the little girl from the village. This was a formidable intellect. A strange, competitive urge sparked within Kola. He needed to test her to see if this composure was a facade. "And what of the human element, Ms. Suleiman?" He interjected, his tone subtly challenging. "The board, myself included, can be resistant to youthful innovation. We are a company built on proven, if traditional, methods. How would you handle the skepticism that inevitably follows someone of your age and gender?" For the first time, a flicker of something, not nerves, but a knowing amusement, crossed her features. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips. It was gone in an instant, but he saw it. "I find that well-reasoned data, clear communication, and proven results tend to win over even the most seasoned skeptics, Mr. Adebayo," she replied, her gaze unwavering. She paused, and in that brief silence, the air crackled. "After all, you were once a young innovator yourself, challenging the established order. I'm confident I can prove my worth, just as you did." The double meaning in her words landed with the force of a physical blow. Prove my worth. The echo of his long-ago dismissal, "Wives don't bother with books and business," rang in his ears. Was it a deliberate barb, or a simple statement of ambition? He searched her eyes, but they were once again pure professional calm. He was left unnerved, intrigued, and utterly captivated. The interview was over. The real interrogation, he sensed, had just begun. "Thank you, Ms. Suleiman," he said, his voice betraying none of his inner turmoil. "That will be all." As she rose and left the room with the same poised grace with which she had entered, Kola knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had to hire her. He needed to understand the enigma that was Amina Suleiman. Amina's hiring was announced with a sterile corporate email, but for Kola, it felt like the most provocative decision he had ever made. The following weeks settled into a new, electrifying rhythm within the Adebayo group, a silent dance conducted in the gleaming, art-filled corridors of power. For Amina, her first day was a study in controlled immersion. Her office, a sleek glass box on the 55th floor, was a world away from Kola's eyrie, but it offered a sliver of the same Lego skyline. She arranged a single, elegant monstera plant on her desk and a framed, abstract print by P. Ju Alatais, a small but firm declaration of her own identity. She was meticulous, brilliant, and quietly relentless. Her reports were not just accurate. They were works of analytical art, delivered ahead of schedule and anticipating questions the board hadn't even thought to ask. She earned respect the only way she knew how, through undeniable competence. Yet, the empire was his, and his presence was a constant, palpable force. Their first official meeting was a presentation on her refined hedging strategy for the refinery. As she stood before the board, laser pointer in hand, she was acutely aware of him sitting at the head of the table, a sculpture in crisp white. He said little, his expression inscrutable, but his focus was a physical weight. When she finished, he offered a single, slow nod. "Proceed." The two words felt like both a benediction and a challenge. Their interactions became a series of charged, fleeting moments. In the executive elevator, the world would shrink to the mirrored walls and the scent of his bergamot and sandalwood cologne. They would stand a professional distance apart, yet the silence between them was a live wire. He would make a comment about the Q3 projections. She would reply with a concise, intelligent summary. Words were exchanged, but the real conversation happened in the glances they stole, in the way his eyes would drop to her ponytail for a fraction of a second too long. Once, a file slipped from her grasp in the hallway, papers scattering. They both bent to retrieve them at the same moment, their fingers brushing against each other as they reached for the same spreadsheet. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, passed between them. "I've got it," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "Allow me," he insisted, his voice low. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the professional facade vanished. In his gaze, she saw not the titan, but the boy from Ibadan, curious and disarmed. Just as quickly, it was gone. He handed her the papers, gave a curt nod, and continued down the hall, leaving her heart thumping erratically. Kola found his own routines disrupted. He began taking the long way to the finance department, inventing reasons to consult with the director. He would pause by her office window, watching her work. He saw the way she would tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear as she concentrated, the faint frown that marred her brow when she was deep in thought, the rare, full laugh she shared with a colleague that transformed her entire face and sent an irrational spike of jealousy through him. He was the architect of this world, the master of every variable. But Amina Suleiman was a variable he couldn't control, an equation he couldn't solve. She was a ghost, yes, but one who had taken solid, formidable form, and with every passing day, she was haunting him not with the past, but with the disquieting, thrilling possibility of a future he had never dared to imagine. The dance had begun, and he, for the first time in his life, was not leading. He was following her steps, utterly and completely mesmerized. The Adebayo Group Refinery Launch Gala was the social event of the season, a calculated spectacle of power and prestige. Kola's Ikoyi residence, a modern architectural marvel usually shrouded in privacy, was thrown open to the world. The air hummed with the sound of a live highlife band, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the murmur of Lagos' most influential voices. For Kola, it was another stage. He moved through the crowds in a flawlessly tailored white tuxedo, a king holding court. He exchanged pleasantries with ministers, shared a laugh with foreign investors, and deftly deflected questions about his competitors. But his attention, the core of his focus, was perpetually scanning the room. He was looking for a single, sleek ponytail. He found her near the infinity pool, its illuminated blue waters blending seamlessly with the dark expanse of the Lagos Lagoon. And the sight of her stole the breath from his lungs. Amina stood with her back to him, but she was unrecognizable from the professional woman in the navy blue dress. She wore a gown of deep, liquid emerald that draped and flowed over her curves like water. And her hair, her signature shield, was down. It fell in a cascade of soft, dark waves around her bare shoulders, catching the light from the floating orbs above. She was not just an employee here. She was a guest, a rising star in his firm, and she was holding her own. He watched, mesmerized, as she listened intently to the grizzled minister of petroleum resources, then effortlessly pivoted to explain the bond yield implications of the refinery to a skeptical Swiss banker, her laughter at something he said sounding genuine and unforced. She was a chameleon, more brilliant and beautiful than he had ever allowed himself to acknowledge. The childhood memory, once a source of vague guilt, now felt like a prophecy he had been too blind to see. Excusing himself from a conversation with the French ambassador, he moved. His path through the crowd felt both endless and instantaneous. He arrived at her side just as the Swiss banker moved away. "You're avoiding me, Ms. Suleiman," he said, his voice lower than he intended, meant for her ears only. She turned, and the direct eye contact felt more intimate than it ever had in the boardroom. A slight smile played on her glossed lips. "On the contrary, Mr. Adebayo, I was doing my job, networking, building relationships for the group." "Cola," he insisted, stepping closer, his body subtly shielding her from the rest of the party. "Call me Cola. We are not in the office now." He gestured slightly with his champagne flute towards the glittering scene. "All of this, it's the result of a promise made a long time ago, just not the one you remember." Her smile softened, but her eyes remained sharp, insightful. "That day in the boardroom, you knew who I was from the very start." "Of course I did," she replied without hesitation, her gaze unwavering. "Just as you knew me. Then why?" he asked, the question that had haunted him for weeks finally breaking free. "Why didn't you say anything?" She looked out over the lagoon for a moment, gathering her thoughts, before returning her luminous gaze to him. "And what would I have said? Hello? I'm the little girl you laughed at in Ibadan. Got a job for me?" She shook her head, the movement causing her hair to shimmer. "No, I needed you to see me. Amina the analyst. Amina the strategist. Not Amina the child from your past. I needed to be hired for my mind, not for a shared history." The truth of her words landed with profound weight. She had not come seeking favor or reparation. She had come to claim her rightful place through sheer merit. "I see you," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, raw with an emotion he could no longer suppress. The mask of the billionaire titan was gone, completely. "Amina, I have never seen anyone more clearly in my life. In the boardroom, in the corridors, and standing here now. I see your brilliance, your strength, your grace, and it humbles me." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a soft wave of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a silent surrender. "I built all of this," he gestured to the mansion, the guests, the symbolic refinery glowing in the distance, thinking I was creating a legacy. "But you were the one who saw the future first. I've spent my life building a kingdom, only to realize the queen had already drafted a better business plan." Amina's breath hitched. This was the vulnerability, the honesty she had never seen in him. The final wall around her own heart crumbled. "I meant it, she confessed, her voice soft but steady. "That day in the dust. It wasn't just a childish fantasy. It was a promise I made to myself. To stand beside you as your equal. I didn't know how or in what capacity, but I knew my destiny was tied to yours." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "All these years, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me. My money, my influence. I thought all of it was completeness. But you came back and offered me the one thing I can't buy. A piece of my own soul I'd left behind in that dusty village. His eyes searched hers, pleading. Amina, I have been a fool for 20 years. Forgive me. In answer, she rose on her toes, her hands coming to rest on his chest, feeling the rapid, strong beat of his heart beneath the pristine white tuxedo. She closed the final inch between them, and her lips met his. It was not a gentle first kiss. It was a conflagration 20 years in the making. It was a fusion of past and present, of a scoffed-at promise and a future now claimed. It was the silent, world-altering merger of two souls, finally coming home. The world had shrunk to the space of the balcony. The cacophony of the gala, the music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, faded into a distant, meaningless hum. The only sounds that existed were the ragged intake of their breath and the frantic beating of two hearts sinking into a single, thunderous rhythm. Cola's arms, which had initially cradled her face, now wrapped around her, pulling her flush against the crisp, unforgiving fabric of his tuxedo. Amina's hands slid from his chest to clasp behind his neck, her fingers tangling in the hair at his nape, anchoring herself as the ground seemed to fall away. The kiss was not an end, but a beginning. A desperate, 20-year conversation conveyed in the language of touch, of longing, of absolution. When they finally broke apart, it was only far enough to breathe the same air. Their foreheads rested together, eyes closed. Amina, he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. Cola, she breathed back, the name feeling both foreign and like the most natural word she had ever spoken. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Come with me. He led her away from the balcony, from the prying eyes that might have begun to notice their absence. They didn't go far, just through a sliding glass door into his private study, a sanctuary adjacent to the main event. The moment the door hissed shut, the last remnants of the party were silenced. This room was a more intimate version of his office. Lower lighting, shelves lined with books and personal artifacts, a deep, cognac-colored leather sofa. He turned to her, his expression laid bare. The billionaire titan was gone. In his place was just a man, vulnerable and utterly captivated. I was an arrogant boy, he began, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out, tracing the line of her jaw as if memorizing it. I built all of this, he gestured vaguely towards the window, a symbol of his entire empire. Thinking I was creating a legacy no one could touch. Fortress. But you were the one who saw the future first. You declared it to the world when I was too blind to see it. He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. I've spent my life building a kingdom, only to realize the queen walked in and had already drafted a better business plan. Amina's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. She reached up and covered his hand with her own, holding it against her cheek. I meant it, she said softly, her eyes glistening. That day in the dust. It wasn't just a childish fantasy. It was a promise I made to myself. To stand beside you as your equal. I didn't know how or in what capacity, but I knew my destiny was tied to yours. Everything I did, every exam I aced, every degree I earned. It was all to make myself worthy of that promise. Worthy? Cola's voice broke. He shook his head, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Amina, don't you see? You were never the one who had to prove your worth. I was. All these years, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me. My money, my influence, a piece of my empire. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. I thought I was complete. I thought this power, this wealth was the finish line. But you came back and offered me the one thing I can't buy, the one thing I didn't even know I was missing. A piece of my own soul ID left behind in that dusty village. He cupped her face in his hands again, his thumbs gently wiping away the single tear that had escaped down her cheek. Amina, I have been a fool for 20 years. Forgive me. In answer, she rose on her toes and kissed him again. This kiss was different, softer, deeper, a seal on a new covenant. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of a future embraced, of a childhood vow finally honored. When they parted, a genuine, effortless smile spread across Cola's face, transforming it. It was a smile she had never seen before, one untouched by the burdens of command. "So," she said, a playful glint returning to her eyes, her own smile radiant. "What happens on Monday? Do I call you Mr. Adebayo or the love of my life in the boardroom?" Cola threw his head back and laughed, a full, rich, unguarded sound that filled the private study. It was the laugh he should have given her 20 years ago. "You, my brilliant, beautiful Amina," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace, "can call me whatever you want. Just promise you'll never stop." 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Eco Hotel's V Suites was transformed into a modern-day paradise. The air, thick with the scent of white orchids and night-blooming jasmine, shimmered with a palpable sense of anticipation. This was not just a wedding. It was the event of the decade, the merger of two legends, the titan of industry and the prodigy who had tamed him. The guest list was a veritable who's who of African royalty, business magnates, and political power brokers. But for the two figures standing at the heart of it all, the glittering crowd was nothing more than a beautiful, blurry backdrop. Cola stood before the ornate archway, draped in lush, tropical flora. He had foregone the Western tuxedo for a breathtaking, custom-made agbada of the purest white Swiss voile, so fine it seemed to float around him. It was intricately embroidered with swirling patterns of gold thread that caught the light, mirroring the veins of gold in the empire he had built. But his usual aura of impenetrable control was gone. As he watched the double doors at the far end of the aisle, his expression was one of raw, unvarnished emotion. A mixture of awe, reverence, and a love so profound it seemed to humble him. The orchestra began the processional. The doors swung open, and there she was. A collective, soft gasp rippled through the ballroom. Amina was a vision of breathtaking modernity and timeless tradition. She had eschewed the voluminous European ball gown for a stunning, custom-designed ensemble. Her dress was a sleek, columnar silhouette in heavy ivory silk, featuring an off-shoulder neckline that was both elegant and daring. It was paired with a magnificent gheli, expertly tied from the same fabric and adorned with a subtle, hand-stitched pattern that echoed the gold on Cola's agbada. She carried a simple bouquet of more white orchids, her face veiled by a whisper of tulle attached to her head tie. But it was her smile, visible through the delicate veil, that truly captivated everyone. It was radiant, triumphant, and filled with a profound peace as her eyes locked with Cola's. She glided down the aisle, not on the arm of a distant relative, but alone. A symbol of her own journey, her own strength, walking proudly towards her destiny. As they stood facing each other, the chief imam's voice weaving their lives together with prayers and blessings, the world fell away. Cola's large, steady hands enveloped hers as they exchanged vows, their voices firm and clear. When the time came, he slid a band of flawless platinum onto her finger, and she did the same for him. The rings were simple, solid, and unbreaking, like the promise they represented. "And by the powers vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife," the imam declared. A triumphant smile broke across Cola's face. He didn't wait for permission. In one fluid motion, he lifted her veil, his eyes drinking in the sight of his bride. Then he pulled her into him, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other around her waist, and kissed her. It was not a chaste, ceremonial kiss. It was a deep, affirming, and passionate seal on their union, a declaration to the entire world that this was where he belonged. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause and joyful cheers. Later, at the lavish reception, Cola stood to make his speech, a glass of vintage champagne in his hand. The room fell silent, every guest hanging on his every word. "They say I built an empire," he began, his voice resonant with emotion, his gaze fixed on Amina, who watched him with shining eyes. "They talk about the towers, the refineries, the bottom line." He paused, shaking his head slightly. "But today, I am not here to talk about a corporate merger. Today, I am merging my life with its truest, most brilliant investment. He raised his glass higher. To my wife, Amina, the little girl who dreamed of this day, and the woman of unimaginable strength and grace who made me believe in dreams again. You are my greatest acquisition and my only eternal asset. As the room echoed with cheers and amen, Kola leaned down and kissed his wife once more. The applause, the music, the flash of cameras, it all faded into a distant hum. For Amina, nestled in the arms of her husband, the only sound that mattered was the steady, strong beat of his heart, a rhythm she now knew was her own. The story that began with a scoffed-at promise in the dust of Abadan had reached its glorious culmination, not as an ending, but as the most magnificent of beginnings.